So yeah, so we can probably get started. So like I said, Mana's gonna start us off with sort of a presentation of the wage study that I was talking about. So Mana, maybe if you want to just introduce who you are, what you do, and then you can just jump right into things.
Hello, everybody. My name is Mana. I am the chair of the economics department at St. Cloud State. I was tasked to, I was given information about a subsample of workers, and then I was tasked to figure out how the subsample of workers are going to be affected by inflation, or are affected and will be affected by inflation. So I've already submitted my report, but I have put a bunch of graphs together. So hopefully I can explain everything in relatively simple terms. And frankly, the picture is pretty simple. So allow me to share my screen and my PowerPoint file right here. This is my PowerPoint file, and there you go. All right, now I give you a very brief idea about the characteristics of the people in the sample, the financial characteristics. So in 2022, the workers in the sample had an average rate of average wage rate of $20.94, with a minimum wage of $12.61 and a maximum wage rate of $34.43. Now, the most important thing is that more than 50% of the people in the sample earned less than average. So in this case, we say that the sample is skewed to the left. That means most of the people earn below average. Now, I looked at a lot of the information that I had was employee headcount, a total gross pay, and also I had information on total medical and dental care. And I had to find some other information myself, data from elsewhere, and I also had to do some estimates and calculations. So in bullet points, I tell you what are the most important things that I've figured out as far as the workers' conditions are concerned primarily. So number one, I figured out that the total gross amount paid to the workers, this is before taxes and deductions, has declined after 2020 as a result of two main factors, okay? One of the factors is a reduction in employee headcount, and the other one is a reduction in per person or average wage rate. So if you look at the data from 2014 to 2020, you can see at in year 2020, 1,500, a little bit above 1,500 people were in the sample. And you can see now less people are employed. So as a result of this reduction in employment, there is a reduction in total gross pay, which you can see here in this graph. Right after 2020, total gross earnings prior to taxes and deductions have dropped. Now, if you calculate the average gross earnings, that is per person, per worker gross earnings prior to taxes and deductions, you can see that after 2022, the average gross earnings are also down. So the reason that total gross earnings is down is not just that some people have lost their job and they're not in the sample. People who are in the sample on average earn less money, okay? The second issue that we need to know that is that the decline in the total gross amount that is paid to the workers has resulted in less spending, of course, by the workers, and that has declined the total output and employment in the surrounding communities. So I estimated for Teamsters how much this reduction in total gross earnings has affected the communities around. But this has nothing to do with the inflation yet. Now, for us to understand inflation, we have to we have to understand what is the net or net amount paid to each worker, and then we have to take into account inflation and basically calculate an inflation adjusted per person net earnings, which is what I calculated. So I basically looked at the benefit deductions. I estimated the tax deductions for the workers in the sample on average. And then I looked at the CPI, which is the price index for a Midwest area, mostly the city areas. And then I figured out in this graph that I'm showing you that although people, the wages were catching up to inflation in 2020, in 2021, because of the horrible inflation we have, the wages, as you can see, are not catching up. So you can see that the inflation adjusted per person net earnings in 2020 is actually negative. So the net earnings is less than the year before if we adjusted for inflation. Now, if this picture doesn't look bad enough, it is very important for us to know that the people in this sample, even in good years, see, like in 2018, this is a relatively good year, meaning that the average net paycheck of the employees was catching up to inflation decently. But even in 2018, if you look at the earnings, you can see that the annual net earnings of an average worker in this specific subgroup has been significantly below living expenses for a family of 4 with one money earning adult. So here I have a graph for you which compares the cost of living versus earnings. Okay, the line below is the average or per person earnings after employee benefits and tax deductions. So this is something that I had to roughly estimate. The blue line on top is the average cost of living for a family of 4 with one working adult. Now, in 2018, which was a relatively good year as far as catching up with the inflation was concerned, the average per person earnings after the deductions, or the net earnings after the deductions, is around $31,906 versus the cost of living. This is based on Deed's data for a family of 4 with one working adult is $61,926. So even in 2018, if you were the head of the family, you had a hard time of basically handling a family of 4. Now, if you have 2 people with the same income, you barely can close this gap. As a matter of fact, if you have a second adult in the family working, yes, the lower line, the income line goes up, but you also need to understand that the blue line also goes up, because then I have to add the childcare expenses to the blue line. So even in 2018, if we had 2 working adults, still this family of 4 could come short. Now, as inflation hits after 2020, you can see this gap between the blue line and the red line has increased by more than $7,000. So if you were doing relatively badly before in 2018, now this gap is $7,000 worse, basically almost $7,000 worse. Now, these are not 100% precise numbers because I had to estimate things, but I did my best given the tax rates and benefits to have a reasonable estimate here. Now, so number one, we haven't caught up to inflation after 2020. Number two, the situation before the inflation was already not pleasant. Number three, if the picture doesn't look unpleasant enough, it is important to understand that American households are not all equally affected by inflationary pressures. So if you have limited resources, or if you are in a lower income category of people, of income earners, you would be more vulnerable to elevated prices, specifically if those prices are elevated in the food sector, fuel, or housing. And it's important to understand that usually higher income families have more discretionary expenditures. So, okay, if gas prices are high, I may take less trips. If the food prices are going up, instead of having a brand, kind of a cereal, for example, I would the richer family, the higher income family, could switch to store-bought brand, for example. But those discretionary expenditures, those cushions, do not exist equally for people with more limited resources, which are the people in this specific subsample that I have been that I have received and I have been investigating. So basically, it's important to know that unlike higher income families that can reduce their discretionary expenses, lower income households are much less flexible because they already spend their money on important, absolutely necessary products. So basically, you can say that consumer price index, which is what we call CPI, and this is what you watch on the news going up because of inflation, is indeed higher for low income Americans than for the rest of America, like let's say the top 25 percentile when it comes to income. Now, what is next for us? We do have some more optimistic scenarios and some more ominous scenarios. In some sense, they're both kind of saying the same thing. The more optimistic scenario is usually presented by Dr. Janet Yellen. So she expects with the Fed increasing, trying to deal with inflation, the Fed is increasing the federal funds rate or the interest rate, right? And we're expecting the Fed to do it even more because tackling inflation is now their main task. Now, every time we increase the interest rate, the purpose is to reduce investment and pull down, reduce aggregate demand, and reduce inflationary pressures. Now, as we increase interest rate, as a result, decreasing investment and reducing aggregate demand, there is always this possibility of a recession. Now, Janet Yellen believes that, okay, the inflation would be dealt with reasonably and the economy would slow down because we are increasing interest rate, but we are not necessarily going to go to a recessionary territory. Some economists have more of an ominous scenario, like Larry Summers would be an example, and I'm a little bit more on the pessimistic side because this is the worst inflation that we have experienced in the last 40 years, and the Fed is taking some aggressive steps of increasing the interest rate, and there is a possibility of crash landing the economy into a recession. So the more ominous scenario, which is by Larry Summers, presented by Larry Summers, and I agree with it more, but again, I'm an economist, not a prophet, the economy could slow down significantly to the level of recession, and the inflation, although would be better, still would be substantial. So yeah, in 2014 or 2024 or 2023, we may have better inflation, but we still would have a substantial inflation. And it's not surprising. We have COVID, we have supply chain issues. China has weird COVID policies, very restrictive. There's this war in Ukraine, which is increasing food and fuel prices, and God knows what the world has in its pocket for us. So yes, it is transitory, but it's easy for the upper 25 percentile to say that. It is not as easy for the 25 percentile who have to make ends meet. So the hardship is expected to persist even if we consider the Janet Yellen scenario, because we still are going to have some inflation and we are going to have some slowing down in the economy. And so inflation will remain a considerable challenge, and a decline in the economy is expected regardless of whether it's harsh, like Larry Summers' prediction, or natural, like Janet Yellen prediction. If you have any questions, I'm sorry that I am the bearer of bad news, but that is the picture and that's the data I had to look at. So is there any question that I can answer?
If you want to ask a question, you can either put it in the chat or you can just unmute yourself and ask it. But
anything you disagree with or something that I didn't cover?
Yeah, I am just curious about, there was analysis about the, it was Eric Jensen. There was analysis in the media that one reason we were getting inflation was because there was a lot of government stimulus, and combined with people staying home and buying more manufactured goods instead of going out to restaurants and leisure and all of that. I'm just wondering how that picture has changed now that, you know, a lot of us feel more confident and, you know, we have our vaccines, and that seems to, you know, as a general matter, be working. And, you know, I notice our family, we're going out a little bit more, we're out in the world more. But, you know, I remember getting the stimulus check and saying, oh, it's my patriotic duty to help the economy by buying X, you know, manufactured good. And I tried to have it, you know, made here in America, you know, and
Yes.
then,
Yes.
you know, there was a lot of talk about that whole shift in spending patterns. And I'm just wondering, do you have any take on that?
That is a smart question. That is a very smart question. Do you have an economics background?
No, I'm just a nerd that follows all sorts of stuff.
Okay, yes. So one reason for inflation, to a degree, you can't blame it just on the stimulus check, but yes. So inflation comes from two main sources. One is too much demand and the other one is not enough supply. So our demand was kept up, right? So because we had our stimulus checks and unemployment benefits and everything else, so people spent the money, although spending was a little bit different during COVID. And then we did not have the same supply because people didn't work as much, and we still do have a labor shortage. So we expect inflationary pressures from this specific issue to get a little bit better, but and we didn't expect that bad of an inflation, but then we had the stupid war in Ukraine and then China's restrictive COVID policies that hurt the supply issues. So yes, that part is loosening a little bit, and hopefully if the labor shortage problem gets better, we may have an increase in supply. But usually demand goes up so easily, supply doesn't go up so easily. And because of that, we have to wait a little bit until the supply problem is solved. Did I answer your question? Eric?
Yeah, I'd say so. Yeah, I'm mostly just curious if there's been a shift back to, you know, services
we may
on some level.
Yeah, we may expect inflation in the service sector as a result.
Okay.
Because we still have some labor shortage in service, right? with demand going up for service and supply not as much yet, we may have some inflation in, I'm not sure whether I mentioned that in my report or not, but there is a report posted on Brookings Institute that explains that so far we have had inflation in the product sector, but now we could even expect more inflation or serious inflation in the service sector. But again, these are guesses and expectations, not prophecy. But very, very good point that you mentioned. Very true. So doing your patriotic duty and spending your money, probably you are adding to inflation. But you at the same time help the economy go forward, right? So as you increase your demand, yes, the general price level goes up, but at the same time you help the output in the economy. So it's not all bad.
Right. I just, if we had COLAs in our union agreements, inflation wouldn't be such a bad thing. But that's been a long time since we've had those.
Yeah, inflation is pressuring everybody with relatively fixed income. I mean, my income is not catching up to inflation at all. As a matter of fact, we had salary, our salaries were frozen. But at least in 2018, I was not in that bad of a shape as some of the people I can see in the sample. Any other question?
Do people have questions about the sort of like the university pay stuff, sort of at the beginning of the presentation? Are there any questions about that or? Okay. Any other questions or? All right, cool. So that's sort of the picture that Mana is painting of the, the conditions relative to the rest of the world. So how are people at the university comparing outside of the university, and how is inflation impacting things? So I think it's a good segue into sort of the next piece of this, which is the survey that we just put out. So for this section, I'm going to invite Sean Rudolph to present. So Sean sort of designed the survey and sort of helping us, get it out and processing the results. So maybe Sean, if you just want to introduce yourself, say who you are, why you're involved in this, and you can go ahead and present what you found so far for the survey.
Can everybody hear me? No?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
cool. And can you see the screen here?
Yeah, I think you skipped the first slide, but
Hold on here. Let me see. Oh, no. Oh, yeah, okay. View from beginning. Okay, is that all right?
yeah, that's good.
Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Sean Rudolph. I work for the Teamsters National Office out of DC in a department called Strategic Initiatives. And I'm working with the local on negotiations and supporting negotiations here. I think most of you know that we rolled out a survey on working conditions and economic insecurity. I think we started the survey last week. And Jackson just asked me to give you a quick update on the results to date. The survey, we're still populating the results and we're getting more responses every day. So what I'm going to show you, don't take it as the final results yet, but I think it gives you some idea, of the presentation that was just made. I think it basically takes that and shows you really the personal impact that it's having on frontline workers at the University of Minnesota. So this is just a few slides, and I'm just going to cover some of the results. So you can see this is the link to the survey if you haven't filled it out yet. We've texted and emailed the survey link to over 2,000 current and former UNM frontline workers. I say current and former is that we've actually gone back in time and surveyed past workers to see how they were impacted on and affected by issues related to economic insecurity. And so far, we've received 416 responses as of this morning. And in terms of just initial key findings, and like I say, there's a lot more information in this survey, but I'm just going to highlight a few things. First, I'm going to talk about the results for just current members, current employees at the U, and then I'll go over some of the findings from the former employees. And in part, I'll just say, like, we surveyed former employees in large part because there's such high turnover at the U. Part of our suspicion was that if we only surveyed current employees, we would be missing some of the impact of how the U's employment policies are really impacting maybe some of the most vulnerable workers and their families, where there might be higher the impact of people where there's high turnover. We would be missing that. So anyway, just to get into this, in terms of, we asked some questions about discrimination at the U, and these are some of the initial results, is that 35% of respondents who identified as female or non-binary said that they strongly agree that their gender affects the way their supervisors treat them. And 49% of female, it should say non-binary employees, report that their supervisors always, often, or sometimes discriminate against workers based on their race, nationality, gender, religion, disability, or sexual orientation. I think Jackson has received some reports from some members and some of our units that that discrimination issues are an important in their units. In terms of racial discrimination, 25% of employees of color strongly agree that their race, nationality, or ethnic group affects the way UMN supervisors treat them. And 31% of employees of color report that their supervisors always, often, or sometimes discriminate against workers based on their race, nationality, gender, religion, disability, or sexual orientation. And while these are kind of general findings, I think we also have some anecdotal information that indeed discriminatory treatment in parts of the U really are an issue for a lot of our frontline workers. And we are continuing to collect data on this, both via information requests from the university and also collecting anecdotal stories from members. In terms of the economic, housing, and food instability of current employees, 61% of respondents to the survey report that they do not earn enough money at the U to cover the cost of basic monthly expenses. 44% report that in the last year they've put off paying bills to be able to buy groceries. 52% report that in the last year they've put off doctor visits or buying medicine because of financial concerns. 8%, a little bit over 8% of respondents report that while working at the U, they've experienced some form of homelessness in the form of that they didn't have their own place to sleep and were sleeping with a friend, a relative in a vehicle or a shelter or in some other place. And I think that number is probably a little bit low because of respondents, about 6% declined to answer the question. So it's possible that some of that 6% would drive up that number. 43% report trouble affording healthy and nutritious meals in the past 12 months, and 22% report being hungry, but not eating because there wasn't enough food in the last 12 months. And a lot of these respondents identified that they were the primary income earner for their families. So that is just a few of the results from the survey for current employees. And I'll just spend a very short period of time going over some of the responses for former employees as well. 28% of former employees that completed the survey report that they didn't earn enough money at the U to cover basic expenses. 55% reported that they often or sometimes put off paying bills to be able to buy groceries. 67% report putting off doctor visits or buying medicine because of financial concerns. And 13% reported that while working at the U, they experienced some form of homelessness, and 7% declined to answer. There is some, I mean, maybe it's just it's speculation and theory, but that, you know, a lot of the people that come and don't stay and leave quickly are more affected by economic instability. And this would suggest that there really is a group of workers that come to the U and are homeless and kind of get lost in the shuffle and leave. And we really don't know what that percentage is, but it is a serious percentage of members. 13% report receiving a food through food stamp or other assistance programs. 36% report trouble affording healthy, nutritious meals, and 20% report being hungry but not eating because there wasn't enough money for food. So, you know, I'm going to stop the screen share here.
Sean, can you go back to the page just before the last one?
Sure.
Let me just take a look at the last two pages again briefly. So this is former employees. I want the current employees.
Right. Yeah, it's you know, we're not doing like a side by side here, but it basically just shows it's yeah, but so this is current and former.
Okay, so they're not I just wanted to see whether the former employees reports were worse than the current employees or the other way around.
I would say they're consistent.
They're consistent.
But there's a possibility that because of the very high turnover, we miss some of the more vulnerable workers there that are experiencing more economic instability, and maybe that higher homeless number among former members or former UMN employees indicates that. But none of this is like,
you can't make it.
Yeah, no.
Definite. Yeah.
No one's claiming that these are like statistically significant or anything like that.
Yes.
Anyway, I just like Jackson asked me to just, it gives you some, I mean, I think everybody knows this. I don't think this is, you know, this is not hidden, but anyway, it supports the other information that's being put forward. And I think it supports a lot of people's experience working at the U.
Yeah.
Cool. So do people have questions about the survey results? Anything in particular that stands out to people?
I'll just say there's like a lot more results in the survey that we just haven't put forward yet. But this is just some some initial stuff so that you know that like when members are filling out that survey, it's not going into some black hole somewhere. This is stuff that we will be using publicly for contract campaign.
So Sean, is it okay if I have access just to survey questions? Or no, that's sort of, even the questions are specific to you and private information.
I'd need to talk with the local about.
Okay,
I think we'd
okay.
have to talk with the local before I like present the,
Yeah.
circulate the survey
Yes.
publicly.
I'm gonna open it up for questions again.
I see that question. Jackson, how far did we go back? We went back, well, we went back a ways. How many years did we go? Was it 5 years
Yeah,
or?
I think it was 3, 4, or 5 years.
Is this from all of the campuses in Minnesota?
It is. Yeah, this is all members. Of course, a lot of the responses are from the Twin Cities, disproportionately from the Twin Cities campus, and I'm not breaking out campuses. But yes, we texted and emailed all current members and attempted to contact all former members, regardless of campus.
Yeah, my information was more than 76% the cities area.
Sean, do we have a sense then, or is it just too hard to read? Because it sure feels that way, that low starting wage, we're pushing a demand and bargaining to have the 20 minimum. That really affected these workers, because we do have some jobs. I mean, the B&G job now, I think the minimum is 17. We have attendance, people in dining in the food service. The starting wage is really, quite low given, conditions. And then some of those workers, especially, dining in particular, the work is very seasonal and unpredictable. So I'm wondering if, we have a sense of, is it that low starting wage before you get, further into the steps? I mean, I'm sort of making a comment that I think this backs up our demand for the 20 minimum. And I think that's one of our best issues. And you can see the employer trying to co-opt us with their, we just want to hire people higher up in the steps, as our way of getting around, not being able to hire people and bringing up that bottom.
Yeah, I don't know. Can you guys see this? I actually skipped the last slide. Can you guys see this? Which is, there was a question, why do workers quit their jobs at UMN? And low wages was the top response. Excessive work, cost, and lack of parking, and then lack of respect and fairness from managers. Those were the top 4, but low wages was, I don't remember the exact percentage, but it was 70% of respondents said that the low wages was the key issue there. So yeah.
Well, I'm up from Duluth, and we have hired, but we have lost. Our turnover rate is insane. The workload is heavy. And not only is it heavy, but we are the hardest worked on campus right now. We have people up at the U of M, and I know, that have been working 15-hour days. And it's we can't keep people because the work is hard. It's physically demanding work to feed that many kids on a daily basis. And then people come in at a low wage and they can't, I mean, for the amount of work that you're doing, the time that you're spending there, it's not worth it. We can't keep people.
Yeah, and I think you all have seen the numbers, but even the U on their internal study admits that they're 10% behind the area market, the area standard wages, not just for you guys, but across the board. So, you know, everyone knows this, it's a systemic problem.
Any other questions?
Actually, Amy, do you want to shut it off? We're not supposed to have fans on if we're not here.
So I do have another question. Another question that I have is, do you believe that starting at a $20 across the board for everybody, do you think it's going to make a dent in it if we're heading towards this recession? Do you think it's going to be helpful? And then the people at the top, I mean, a 5% raise, that's giving me, I think, an 80-cent raise. I've been there for 23 years. I'm at the top. I just don't know how 80 cents is going to help me. I just don't know what the answer is, you know, or how do we arrive at that?
I don't know if I don't know if anybody's equipped to answer that specifically, but I mean, I don't know, Mana, if you were able to look at what other employers were paying, you know, in the area when you were doing your study, but.
And I mean, that to me, I think would be so helpful to see what are other employees paying. How do they keep, we just can't keep people. We can't keep them. We've hired, we lost like 8 people. We hired, I think 4. We had 5 that left. We just can't. Today we fed a football camp and we had 4 workers for a football camp. For total setup all morning. It's crazy. I don't know how we're going to do it in the spring and be able to keep things open. I just don't know.
So I do have in my report a graph that is about, it's a comparison of hourly wage, a wage rate. So the average hourly wage rate in Hennepin and Ramsey counties for a family of 4 with 1 working adult is $32.99 versus the average wage rate of a representative worker in the Teamster sample was only $20.94. That may not be exactly a very good comparison because the people who are in the deed sample might be having different jobs than people who are in Teamster sample. But the thing is that they're earning $12 less per hour compared to an average person in Hennepin and Ramsey County. So that says their standard of living is basically $12 per hour less than an average family, an average earner.
Yeah, and I think just anecdotally, like we can say, you know, I keep hearing this, but you know, the Hennepin County just raised its minimum starting wage to $20 an hour. I think as of last week, maybe the week before, the full $15 minimum wage came into effect for the city of Minneapolis. And, you know, that's only, you know, about $1 short of what the starting rate is at the university. You know, in terms of greater Minnesota, I think it's a little bit harder to say like what the sort of fluctuation is in terms of minimum starting rates. But, you know, even if you put aside what Mana says, like, you know, similarly paying jobs in the area, I think are starting well above where we're at. And, you know, that's information that's not new to anybody here, I don't think, but I think it's just worth emphasizing to people. So. Okay, are there any last questions people have? Any last comments? Okay. So we can probably wrap this up. So just before people leave, a couple updates. So hopefully you all have been getting the bargaining updates through email or through your, talking to people in your workplace. But we have gone through bargaining for 2 rounds, and the next round will be on Monday and Tuesday next week. So a couple things we're going to be doing during the bargaining is presenting the university with Mana's research and the full report that she's put together. And we'll also be presenting them with the survey results that Sean just gave to all of you. So that's sort of what's in store. As people I'm sure are aware, the university has this proposal of 3.85%. That's what they're putting forward, and they're attaching a lot of strings to it. Eric mentioned earlier that part of this is they want to essentially add steps and create a new pay scale for people that would force people to work for the wage increase and would still fall beneath some of the pressures that Lana was talking about with inflation. So we're going to keep bargaining, but we'll definitely have an update for people come Wednesday. In the meantime, a couple of things that people can do. So when this meeting's done, I'm gonna download the recording and have it sent to our communications people at the local. So hopefully tomorrow morning we'll have a video on YouTube for people to share around and sort of present people and some of your coworkers with this research and sort of the survey results that Sean was talking about. So that's one thing, and we'll make sure to email everybody that. The other thing is, we are trying to get people more involved in whatever capacity you're comfortable with. So one thing that we have is this contract campaign committee. It's sort of available to any members who are interested in getting more involved and sort of contributing to the contract campaign and fighting for higher wages and some of the things we're talking about tonight. So I'm putting a form in the Zoom chat right now. If you have the capacity to get more involved, I'd encourage people to fill out that form. It's basically asking you, what things you're interested in helping with, and also asking for some of your personal information so I can get in touch with you afterwards and sort of figure out how you can help out. So I put the form in the Zoom chat. You can feel free to fill it out afterwards. If you're already involved, you don't need to fill it out because you're already involved in things. So that's the meeting for today. So thanks everybody for coming. Thanks to Mana and Sean for presenting. And
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
catch everybody later.
Thank you.